Hey.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another Loki community call. This is the August edition in 2025. I am Nicole van der Hoeven, and today I have two awesome people with me, and we're going to be talking all about structured metadata. But first, let me introduce awesome person number one.
Can I just say that it's my birthday month? So this is the fact that we're doing structured metadata because I love structured metadata. It's my birthday month. So, but sorry, I am Jay Clifford. I am Nicole's right hand man, as always. And then below me is Salva. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Absolutely. Yeah. Hi, everyone. This is Salva, part of the Loki team for about 3 years and a half already. Time flies. Based in southern Spain. I'm happy to be here to talk all things structured metadata and some OTel, I guess.
Awesome. Before we get started with structured metadata, I know Jay's like raring to go weirdly, but we have a few announcements. First, we talked about the Loki Helm maintainers group. We now have like a small group of hand selected Grafana champions who are maintainers of the Loki Helm chart. And we have added two new people since we talked about it, Mike Timmerman and Quentin Bisson, or I hope that's how you pronounce it. But we're so happy to have them, and it's been going really well. And then, Jada, do you want to talk about the kubectl stuff?
Yeah, so this shouldn't affect the day-to-day running. It's just obviously a big PR that you will see get merged into the Loki Helm. This is just to do with the Bitnami image issue. By August, I think most people have seen that a lot of images will basically be sort of made end of life, and they're moving these to like a kind of like another repository. And so we basically use one of those images within our gel implementation in order to generate API keys for gel automatically on deployment. We felt that it was best just to kind of remove that. It basically simplified the Helm chart and just provide some instructions for generating those initial admin keys for gel. So OSS users, nothing to worry about. Gel users, there's documentation, but you only really need it if you are deploying new gel instances. So yeah, but if you've got any issues or concerns, just drop us a message in the community channel and we shall take a look.
Yeah, and Salva, why don't you introduce yourself a little bit more and talk about like why we're doing structured metadata? Like what do you have to do with structured metadata, and do you love it as much as Jay?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I gave you a bit of context of why am I here talking about the structured metadata is because I was one of the people that implemented the structured metadata. Originally, we implemented it so we could support OTel natively. Looks like we did. So yeah, I also happen to like structured metadata a lot. So what is structured metadata to start with? It's basically a feature of Loki that allows you to attach some labels to each one of your log lines, but those labels don't need to be indexed, such like the stream labels. So that's pretty much it in a nutshell.
So that's an interesting one there already, because we're already using the term labels when we also have this idea of labels, as you said, like indexed labels. So can you differentiate just a little bit more there? We have labels which are indexed, they create log streams, right? And then structured metadata, where do they exist in the storage of Loki? Like where, like if we go under the covers, is that represented when you're like retrieving them?
Sure. Yeah. So you will see that we use the term label like on many places. Label is pretty much like a name and value pair. So we use it in different ways in Loki. Originally, since Loki was created, we use it for streams, and streams can be defined as the source of your log. So for example, one example of a stream can be on a Kubernetes environment, the cluster namespace, and the container, for example. That can create like a stream. And then you have all the logs from that source on a single stream. Those are indexed, meaning that Loki creates like a data structure so it can resolve the relevant data given your stream matcher in the query. An example on the query could be give me all the logs for the cluster in US Central Zero, for example. So that would resolve all the streams matching that. Now those are indexed, right? And the important part of that is that Loki ideally wants an index that is rather small, so it can resolve these kind of questions relatively fast. If you start putting like many labels on your index, and specifically those labels have like a high cardinality meaning that can have like many different values, the size of the index will be very big. So answering those kind of simple questions of giving all the logs line from this cluster can take way longer than you may want. So our solution is putting all those high cardinality labels somewhere else, and that would be on structured metadata.
Okay,
Awesome.
so how do you decide what should be a label and what should be in the structured metadata? Because, maybe I know you're trying to reduce it for high cardinality, but what are some things that you would think about to decide to kind of prioritize what really needs to be a label?
Mm-hmm. So as you pointed out, one of we need to keep like the focus on what the target is, right? That is having like a rather small index that plays nice to the queries that we usually try to answer. So in the context of observability, this usually maps to the source of the logs, right? So for example, if we have like a big incident in one specific product on a region, you usually want to query by the cluster namespace. So it makes sense that you use those as stream labels. So the general rule of thumb is that you use labels that tells you the source of your logs. Everything apart from that, unless some specific cases, it's usually better to have them on structured metadata. Structured metadata label examples might be things like trace IDs, customer emails that you can have many user agents, right? Imagine if you have to put like all the different user agents on the index, like that index can be huge, right? We can dive a bit more into the details on why having a big index is bad, but yeah.
So I think the trace ID thing is really good to call out, because that's an example of something where if you are using distributed tracing and you are using trace ID as a label, that is really going to lead to high cardinality. And yet you don't want to not have that, because having that in structured metadata means that you can correlate between telemetry signals. So you can see like when you're using the Grafana stack, you can then see like the log that corresponds to a certain component, and then for that component also see like the transactions that went through it, or like use Pyroscope or something to see the CPU utilization of it. But it's only in structured metadata that you can have all of these very dynamically generated IDs. Otherwise, it's just going to blow up your index.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that also opens the door a bit of more maybe talking about OTel down the road, because actually OTel kind of simplifies all of this like a lot, right? Like having like a consistent labeling that allows you to correlate all these telemetry signals with each other. And yeah, as I said at the beginning, we actually created structured metadata to support OTel exactly because of this. We had to store this kind of information somewhere.
So before we get to the OTel stuff, I do have some silly questions of my own around like structured metadata. I'm a big fan, but I'm just going to ask them anyway because they're fun. Why? If I'm already, say, like sending a JSON payload as the log body, and I've already defined my labels, like, why is it better to put it into structured metadata than just, say, using some regex parsing and extracting, say, like the trace ID from like the JSON body? Is there a particular benefit from just going like directly to structured metadata?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say in most of the cases for most of the users, having them just in the log lines is usually fine, because Loki is really good at processing like a huge amount of data and extracting labels out of them with the parsers. Now, if you happen to have a lot of logs, and those logs are JSON objects with even nested objects inside each inside the object, and you want to look for something very specific, and you do that regularly, either because you have a dashboard with a query or you have a recording rule, it's actually a good idea to extract that specific bit into structured metadata, because what you are doing is actually skipping all that parsing right away. So all the queries would be like way faster to execute and play nicer to the system underneath.
I see, because basically you're doing like give me these logs, pipe it to like JSON, and then you're extracting the attributes, and then you're basically then having to do the regex on top of that of going, okay, the trace ID equals this. This is now one of those relative links in Grafana, and you click that. So it's almost like you've created 3 extra steps for yourself that all require like Loki processing versus just like going straight structure metadata. Cool. I like
exactly.
That.
Yeah.
And also, like, I know Jay and I have previously done a community call about queries, and we know from that one that if you do any sort of parsing, including JSON, and then also anything with regular expressions, like, yes, it will work, but it's also it's really expensive computationally. How does it compare? How does querying structured metadata compare to that, like in terms of resource utilization?
Yeah, so we actually store structured metadata along with the log line. But the key here is that we don't need to process the whole log line, right? So we don't need to do any parsing that is wasteful. Comparatively, like for example, if you are matching a given string or a regular expression, you need to look throughout the whole log line potentially to decide whether or not the log line that you are filtering by is relevant or not. Whereas if you have that already in structured metadata, first you can skip right away all the entries that doesn't contain that structured metadata label at all, and then you can filter right away on the structured metadata value itself, instead of having to go through potentially all the log line to decide whether it's relevant or not. But I would say in most of the cases, the performance gains come when you run expensive parsing logics. Parsing like with regex that are quite complicated, that cannot be simplified right away, or JSON parsing, for example.
Rock Darko has a question that's relevant to what we were just talking about. Are there any specific Grafana features that require the trace ID to be an indexed label rather than being just a mere attribute in the payload?
I bet there is not, because we would be in serious troubles if that would be a requirement.
Yeah.
But that's a great question.
Yeah.
Indeed. So far, for example, to correlate between trace IDs that you would see like in a log line and the trace IDs in Tempo, you could define in your data source a matching expression, like using the JSON parser, if I recall correctly, and extracting that into a parse label, something use that. But now, if you use a structured metadata, that just happens like out of the box. You probably only need to configure in the data source the name of the structured metadata label that you want to correlate with.
Yeah. Okay, maybe we could have a look at what a LogQL query looks like for structured metadata.
Yeah. I have a question on that. If you're demoing, Salva, are you demoing? Sorry, that's my bad.
I wasn't expecting to, but I can totally do that.
If not, no worries. I guess because there was a question that I had. You implemented a feature maybe, I got 6 months ago now.
No, it's way older than that. I would say it's probably 1.5 years or something like that.
Because it was the autocomplete feature. It's like you could basically in your query see like the structured metadata attribute, like key names before you even like as you were typing the query. So I'm assuming that also we can see that as like a benefit of using structured metadata versus extraction, because you have to first do the JSON parsing to see those extra attributes.
Yeah, actually, it's funny that you mentioned that, because that's actually something that we didn't end up shipping. So that was the outcome of a hackathon, right? So we run hackathons quarterly, and we get to work on whatever that we like. And Shantane, which is another Loki maintainer, and myself, we decided to work on that. We didn't end up shipping that because we are on the process of doing major changes to Loki. So at this moment in time, like making huge changes to the index didn't probably pay off in a way, because at the end of the day, it's a hackathon. So we did it in a very hacky way. That it's obviously maybe not production ready. So we decided to wait for it a bit, to push it a bit back. But it's definitely like a feature that we may want to see in the future.
Oh, very cool. Sorry, that was my bad. I thought that was in. I was like, yes, that's great. That's good. But people can obviously look forward to it in the future, potentially. They use structure.
Absolutely. I mean, on the other hand, we do have like a walk around on the Grafana UI itself. Like it can actually already recommend you some structured metadata labels by kind of peeking at some of the log lines to see like what's in there. So that's how it kind of works nowadays.
I've been fooled.
Salva, would you mind showing us something?
Yeah, absolutely. The only problem is that the only data sources that I have is our internal ones. I don't know if those are the best ones that I can use.
Play?
Okay, yeah, absolutely. Let's use those.
We can figure it out together. But
yeah,
also
is that like play at grafana.com or
play.grafana.org? Or .com will work as well. It redirects.
Oh, okay, cool.
But I also wanted to shout out the Grafana champions that were instrumental to this being a thing, like Avanish Vagela. It was actually his idea to do a Loki community call on structured metadata. So thank him. And he also contributed a lot of questions, as did Andre Ziviani, who's in chat, and Mike Timmerman. So we're mixing in a lot of those questions from champions there. We really love our champions. If you want to know about the Grafana Champions program, I will put a link in the description and in chat, because it's a growing group of really, really intelligent and experienced people who are just doing some awesome things, like awesome even for us Grafanistas. Okay, Salva, looks like you got something up. I'm going to put it on stage.
Yeah, there we go. So you can see my screen now, right?
Yes.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so here I have one explore view for Loki, and you can see that I'm pulling all the log lines for this specific cluster, right? And you can see that here I have like a long list of log lines. Some of them seems to be erroring, other one seems to be fine, but the important bit is this section here with all the labels. Here you have the indexed labels, which are basically the stream labels. As you can see, this kind of looks like the best practices, because this comes from the source of the log line, and I don't think any of them looks like high cardinality to me. But on the other hand, you have the structured metadata one for this specific log line, and here we have things like detected level error. This is some structured metadata label that we automatically attach to each log line, so we can show this like breakdown of the severity. But you have other things like the pod, the trace ID, and the user, which can be like, that can have like a huge cardinality. So now, for example, I want to look for everything that was regarding, let's use the user, for example. It's as easy as using user equal and the value. And here I should have like everything that is related to that user. You can see the user here, you can see the user here, you can see the user here, or I can do exactly the same with some trace ID. So I get everything that is okay. Yeah, obviously you need to change the label name. Yeah, let's use, so that will be trace ID. I think you can just like click here, and yeah, that will add everything here. So here you would have like whatever that happened with this trace ID, regardless of the container, the pod, or whatever. You can do other things, like for example, you can do the count. Let's use rate. auto, and here we can do like a sum by user, for example. So you can use structured metadata as any regular, as any regular label, right? Let's just remove this. I don't know what's complaining that about. Unexpected identifier. What did I mess up?
I must admit, this is pretty shocking for me, but I'm also super impressed to see the new UI element separation in the Loki log messages, because before we never used to sort of differentiate. We just said like, here's the attributes, and now we actually say this is structured metadata.
Yeah, exactly. And I actually going back to this thing here, you can even have a look at the table here. And if you scroll here, you can show, for example, a user column. So you have all those values at hand, which is also like really, really handy.
Very cool. So I guess my next question then is, what agents or what collectors currently support this behavior? Because it's something that has to happen before we hit Loki. So could you sort of take us through a couple of collectors that can currently support structured metadata?
Yeah, absolutely. So obviously, all the collectors that we as Grafana own, that being Alloy, Promtail, even though you should be using Alloy if you use Promtail. And also, I think there are some third-party ones that already use support structured metadata. I think Vector is probably one of them. I don't know if you know any other. And then the OTLP like collector, for example, that one ships like everything in the OTel format, but then we map things to index label or structured metadata based on some configurations that we can set.
Yeah, and that's a good point to start getting into OTel in general, because I mean, at least internally now, it's hard to mention structured metadata without talking about the OTel use case, because that is one of the primary ways that people are using structured metadata. So what does structured metadata have to do with OTel?
Yeah, so the challenge with supporting OTel with what we have had before structured metadata is that everything that doesn't happen to be within the log line had to be allocating on the stream, right? So an OTel sends things like, I'm sure, the user agent, or if you happen to be running in some Java, maybe some compilation ID or some machine name, something like that, that can have high cardinality and can just like blow up the index. So what we decided to build something that would allow you to attach some metadata to the log lines. And that's how structured metadata came to life. And how it works for the OTel case is that in OTel, you have resource attributes, scope attributes, and log attributes. So we map everything that is within the scope attributes and the log attributes to a structured metadata. And for the resource attributes, you can decide whether to index some things or attach as a structured metadata other things. In a Kubernetes environment, it would be, and we actually have like some good defaults for this, having the cluster name, the namespace, the region, like you name it, things that are rather constant and not high cardinality, those would be automatically mapped to stream labels, and the rest would be put into structured metadata.
Okay, that makes sense. So we also in Loki OSS, we can also do metadata promotion, structured metadata promotion. What exactly does that mean? How can some attributes be promoted, and like how do you set that?
Yeah. So as I said, we provide some good defaults that would work probably in 80% of the cases, but this world is big and very diverse. So of course, like there is no free lunch, and we need to have like some knobs that we can adjust so we can make Loki useful for everyone. So we have one OTLP config configuration that is per tenant, and where you can map like all those resource attributes, scope attributes, and log attributes to whether you want to index them, have them in structured metadata, or drop them right away. Yeah, I see. I don't know if Jay or Nicole is sharing their screen, but this is the list of default attributes that we map to stream labels.
No, and I think like it's an interesting one in the fact that it's like, yeah, we basically cover a broader topic. It's like you're not always going to have all of these labels show up when you use OpenTelemetry. It like depends on your scenario. It's like if you're not deployed in Kubernetes, you're not going to have those as like labels by default for any reason. It's purely going to promote if they exist and only if they exist, right?
Yeah, that's correct. Exactly. So we aim to provide some good defaults, but if those doesn't work for you, you can like extend this list or completely ignore this list and come up with yours. One common use case that we see for this is people want to have like the team label or something like that they ship a team label on the resource attributes, and they want to index that. Because when you have like many teams in your company, you usually maybe want to focus on your log lines and you don't care that much about the rest. So that's something that you usually filter by.
And then as long as they add it to the resource attributes, and then they can basically use the OTel config promotion to move that up to a label.
That's correct. Yeah.
Gotcha. And I guess to get into the weeds on the configuration, but to sort of look into some of how that works on the open source side. So is it something that has to be in the Loki configuration? Does it have to be a global, or can it be a per tenant limit that you can set?
That can be a per tenant limit that can be set. Of course, you can set like a default for everyone, and then if you have a specific tenants that has a special needs, you can just like configure them ad hoc.
Amazing. And then like let's say you want to keep is there a way of like keeping most of the defaults and then maybe like dropping ones? Can you like demote in the configuration?
Yeah, absolutely. So you can see here in the resource attributes that you have this ignore defaults flag. If you toggle that to true, you will get rid of the labels that you saw on the list above, and you will need to configure the ones that you want to index in the attributes config. Whatever that, if you don't set these ignore defaults to true, you still like keep those, and you can extend that list with whatever that you configured in the attributes config. And as Jay pointed out, you can not only promote things to index or structure metadata, but you can also decide to drop like completely something. And that's usually necessary if you are shipping things that you should not, like some I don't know, credit card number or something like that. I hope you do not, and I hope any OTel collector would ship such things. But in case that happens, you can drop them. Another reason why you would need to use this drop is in case you have a collector that ships like a lot of labels. So by default, all those labels will go to structured metadata, but we do have some limits about the structured metadata in the sense of how much each payload can contain of structured metadata, like in total in megabytes, or the amount of different structured metadata fields that it can contain. That limit it's quite big. It's decently big. I don't think any regular user would hit that. But some big like OTel user can hit those, and would make sense to use this drop action to get rid of those and be able to push things to Loki successfully.
So that's kind of like where you add like a custom attribute that kind of like you kind of overuse it. You might put in like a really massive like payload into the value side of a key, and then what you basically would just hit the limit on that custom attribute and say, sorry, would we reject the whole log line because of that attribute? So is that something to keep in mind?
Yeah, exactly. That would solve exactly that use case. Like something that comes to my mind is maybe you have an OTel collector that you add like many layers and you ship everything that is Java related and everything that is Docker related and everything that is Kubernetes related and everything that is Linux related. Like all those things, so many metadata like flowing in, and you may hit like those limits and your log lines would be discarded before being ingested. In that case, you do want to filter out the things that you don't really use. And even within the regular OTel use case, there are many things that you don't regularly use because they are kind of duplicated. So for example, if I recall correctly, I think you have the severity, which is a string, and then you have the severity number, for example. They are pretty much like the same. So you may want to decide, okay, I just want to keep one.
Gotcha. Okay, that makes sense to me. And I guess my final question. So I've been quick firing on this because I feel like I've been waiting for the configuration part. This has just been a page with Salva on this entire time. My last question is we obviously talk a lot about there's different types of attributes in OTel. There's like the resource attributes, and then there's like logline attributes. Is it still the case we only let people promote only resource attributes to labels, or do we let them access any sort of attributes and let them promote them, and we just let them take the risk of promoting them?
Yeah, as of today, if I'm not mistaken, we only allow promoting to stream labels, index labels, like here in this doc, only the resource attributes. The reason for that is that usually the scope and log attributes are usually like really high cardinality. So to encourage the best practices, you usually want the resource thing, which, as the name implies, kind of tells you like what's the definition of the resource, right? Like where are these logs like coming from? So as of today, we are not supporting like promoting to stream labels anything that goes like within the scope or of the logs attributes.
No, that makes sense. I think it was like, and then we just like let people promote, I think label, wasn't it? Like the severity or something like that. Because that was like an issue that was about 50 comments long, being like, it was like a petition. Let us promote body. And so we were like, okay, fine.
We have a question from Mario Anthony Seminario Bravo. Are there more Loki exporter examples?
What do you mean by Loki exporter examples here?
I think for configuration, I think he's saying.
Like the configuration that we were talking about right now? Because this Loki exporter thing sounds more like OTLP thing to me.
Is that not the Loki, the old Loki exporter? Like we used to have that plugin in the
older one. I think we are trying to do away with that. We're trying to move away from it and towards OTLP, the new native OTLP endpoint. And I think that's what we would recommend that you do, because the Loki exporter was something that we came up with before we had the native endpoint. Yeah. Also, he says, hello from Peru. Hola.
Cool. Hello.
Salva y yo hablamos español también. But okay, let's talk about. We were talking about those labels that by default are promoted. The structured metadata that are automatically promoted when we see them. And I wanted to point out that this is one of the benefits of following OTel semantic conventions, because if you had other structured metadata that are where the attributes are like named slightly differently, then we're not going to be able to do that. And it's so nice to have that done for you, to be like, it is a little bit more opinionated, but it is good to know like these are safe to be labels and some of them are not. So I think one of the best practices for structured metadata would be to use OTel semantic conventions if you're instrumenting with OTel anyway.
Yeah, fully agreed. I think the only one I like discovered, which might be a bit of a no-no in Python land, and we've kind of left it in there because we don't want to have a breaking change, is, let me get this one right.
Oh, yeah.
the service instance ID, because it turns out in OTel semantics, service instance ID can be unbounded because it's basically like potentially a thread count in Python land. I don't know if that extends to multiple languages, but yeah, that was one we were like, maybe we should demote that to structured metadata rather than it be a label. But because so many people use it as a label currently, it's just something we've had to sync, like what we do with pod, right, and let people slowly wean themselves off of it. But yeah, I think that was the only big one that I had on there.
Yeah, and also like the semantic conventions for logging in OTel, that's still, I mean, it's technically still not stable. It's still in development. So it's constantly changing and it is a pain to keep up with. But we also have a lot of OTel contributors on our side that are making sure that that everything OTel is going to be compatible with our stuff because we're using it too. So that's another reason to be up to date with OTel semantic conventions, because if you're just using that, then we will do the guesswork of like figuring out what needs to be a label and whatnot. But what else should we do? What else are some best practices for using structured metadata in general?
Yeah, I think one topic that we didn't touch base on is if you already have things in structured metadata, in the log line, should you extract everything into structured metadata just because it can be faster eventually? And the answer to that is no. Long story short is that you would still ingest and have to keep both things, right? So you would be storing twice as much data. You would need to process, like on the ingestion part, twice as much data, right? So if you're not using OTel and you're shipping everything in the log line, it makes sense to use structured metadata to add things that doesn't already exist in the log line, or things that you query very often and you see some query performance impact on. That would be the rule of thumb here.
Yeah, that is like super confusing. When I first started using Loki, I'm like, okay, so there are labels, then there's structured metadata, but they're both kind of the same thing, except one is like how do you know what the difference is? And then you can also have them just in the log line, which you can also query. So it's like, how what do you put where? But I think the way that I think about it is like it's performance. It's how often you're going to query something, and also how fast you want it to be. So something like the source, or the environment or something like that, that's a good candidate to be a label. And then for structured metadata, it's like kind of like the next step down, where you might not need it to be a label, and it is a little bit less performant than having it indexed, but it's still faster than if it's in the log line. And then the log line is like, well, sometimes I have to search for this, and it might be really expensive, or it might take a really long time, but that's more okay for me because I don't run it that much. Is that also what you would say? Or is
Yeah, I
that
think that's
oversimplification?
I would say, like, in general, that's a good rule of thumb. Luckily, we can configure those things, and as
Yeah.
a Loki operator, you can learn on the go and make decisions along the way, right? So one of those decisions would be, oops, okay, my index is blowing up. Okay, let me get rid of this label. Or it's like getting a lot of cardinality, whereas it was not having that much cardinality in the past. Let's move it to the structured metadata, right? Or the other way around. Like, I have this dashboard that runs like this expensive query looking for this specific JSON part. Okay, let me extract that to structured metadata so I can just like filter by it right away without doing any parsing. Or the same for a recording rule that evaluates, I don't know, every 1 hour and needs to go through many logs. Like, it makes sense to extract those things that you are recording into a structured metadata so you can filter out like easier. So yeah, that I would say that's generally the rule of thumb here.
So you touched on a minute ago about like the idea of size. It's like you could have like twice the amount if you've got it in the body and you've also got it in structured metadata. And I think this is a champion question because this we're getting into like monitoring our Loki instance, and this feels like a champion question anyway. The question is, I might actually copy and paste it and see if we can have it come up in the channel. We'll see if this works. But the question that was asked was the Loki distributor bytes received total. Does that include structured metadata, or do they need to use the Loki distributor structured metadata bytes received total and combine them to get the total volume of your log?
Yeah, so the distributor bytes received total already accounts for the structured metadata and the content of the log line. The other metric that we have specific for the structured metadata is useful for you to know out of the total bytes received, how much was a structured metadata. So for example, in the OTel world, you would see that most of the bytes received actually accounts for the structured metadata, whereas outside OTel world, you would see the other way around.
Gotcha. So you could basically subtract the structured metadata from, and then you would just get your log body, and you can see kind of like the proportion of which and kind of where you're putting most of it, like per.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. To put like another example, touching base to what we discussed early on, is if you have everything in your log line and now you extract everything on a structured metadata but keep it in the log line, the bytes received total will be twice as much.
Gotcha. And so I guess like, oh, sorry.
No, I was just going to say that was a champion question from Avanish Vagela.
Yes, awesome. Thank you, Avanish. Fantastic. That was I sensed it. It just gave me the ultimate champion question vibes. I guess sorry, Nicole, you go for it.
Sorry, Jay. I was just going to say, like, you talked about how you shouldn't have you were talking about whether you put something in the log line or if you add it to structured metadata. But if you do decide, so you're talking about why you shouldn't necessarily, like, the difference between the two. But like, if you do decide to move something to structured metadata, should you delete it? Should you try to delete it from the log body?
You had my question. We're on the same wavelength, Nicole. This is wild. Nice. It wasn't even in the script.
Yeah, I would say in most of the cases that's not necessarily, as long as you extract like only like a small set of labels out of the logline. I don't think it's worth the extra complexity of setting the pipeline to remove that specific bits of the logline. I don't think that would make sense. Now, if you happen to decide to extract everything into structured metadata and you don't want to ship twice as much data, then you probably need to. But yeah, the general rule I would say is you don't usually need to.
And is there any effect if you have like a very tiny log line and then everything structured metadata or a label? Like, is that okay? Are there any issues with that?
I would say on an ideal world, that's probably what happens with OTel the most, right? It's like you have a lot of metadata in the structured metadata, and the logline can actually be like something relatively small.
Because that was, I guess, my thought as well, was like that I had this idea in like the Loki pipeline and Alloy, you basically do exactly what Nicole said, which is like extract, like basically pull everything out into like the cache in Alloy and say, okay, these are all going to be structured metadata, and then just use the log format component in Alloy. And then I'm thinking about it, it's like you could just be left with a very tiny little log line that comes up in Grafana, and it's like now you have to click the drop down to see like all of those structured metadata attributes. Is there a way, I guess, in Grafana to like, say you've like, especially in OTel, can you kind of like resurface those so it makes it look like they're in the body when they're not in the body, if that makes sense?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so there have been discussions around that to maybe do some line formatting magic to put everything into a log line. but we do have seen like some mixed result with that. So what we end up doing is implementing this table view. I don't know why we look smaller now. Let me save myself a bit more.
We all kind of adjust slightly to be in frame.
Yeah. So that's why we implemented this like table view that we saw like in the demo early on. And in that table view, you can select like show me all the labels, and that will give you like a column for each one of the structured metadata fields that you want to see. And it's really cool because you can filter by the column right away. So yeah, it tricks. Yeah.
So the you know how you can do a line format or a label format. So does a line format work for structured metadata too?
It does, yeah. So in general, in the line format, you can put like any label that you want inside there. So that label can be something that you parsed previously on the query and you want to put it there, or that can be structured metadata, or that can be an stream label as well.
Is there a point, or is there like a tell when you would say there's too much structured metadata?
I would say, obviously, when you start hitting like the limits that we were discussing early on, and you start seeing things dropping. Other than that, I'm sure there might be, but there is nothing that comes to my mind right away.
Yeah. There's a question here that is exactly the next thing that I wanted to get into. Almaz Vagapov asks, is there a difference in query speed between filtering by fields in structured metadata and running a query using just a regular expression? So we had already talked about how it's still faster to use structured metadata than to use regex on the log line. But like I want to get into it a little bit more, like about the resource consumption and performance with those three things: querying the log line, usually through parsing, and then structured metadata, and then querying labels. Like how much faster is it?
Yeah, so I would say in most of the cases, it's not actually faster by itself. There are many things on how we query things that actually add more latency to the query itself rather than the filtering bit of each one of the log lines. An edge case can be what we discussed early on, like having this huge JSON object and you're looking for something like very deep into the object structure, and you need to do like all the parsing logic and that stuff. Or speaking of regular expression, you have very complex regular expressions with many branches that pretty much like end up happening the same that was happening with the JSON parsing, right? That is like an expensive operation to extract what you want. But in most of the cases, if you're just doing the pipe equal match string or a simple regular expression, I don't think you will see much performance gain unless the log line is huge and you happen to be looking at something that is at the very end of the log line, so you need to process everything. But those are like very, very edge cases that probably 95% of the cases you won't run into. There is one problem with having a lot of structured metadata fields that just came to my mind asking your previous question, Jack, that I think it's somewhat related to this one, is that when you are doing a metric query, you may run into the maximum series per query limit because you already have like all these labels already extracted, right? So you may run into a lot of in-memory cardinality. In that case, what you can do is use the keep or drop commands, so you only keep the relevant labels. So for example, imagine that, as in my previous example, I want to do the sum by user, but beside the user structured metadata, I have like I have tons of other labels. I would do keep user, so I only end up aggregating on that one.
Okay, so if you're comparing structured metadata versus versus regex of a query using regex on the log line, then structured metadata is faster. Is that right? But if you're comparing structured metadata to just like pipe equals or not equals, then it's not really faster.
No, I wouldn't say it's really faster. Like
Okay.
at the processing level might be faster, but as I said, like in these
Yeah.
distributed systems, we end up having like networking latency that actually ends up adding like more to that.
Yeah, it's
Is
like
there a go on, Jay?
I was gonna say, yeah, it's just like it seems like it's the scenario in which you use it in that potentially you gain performance gains because you've adversely caused yourself a worse query performance from doing a ton of horrific passing on like the query side. And you're like,
Yeah.
actually, if I had just done it on the other end, it would have been fine. But at the end of the day, if it's very simple, just like a JSON extraction, and you just pulled one key, like it's going to be negligible, like the speed increasing.
Yeah,
really
absolutely. Yeah.
Got it. Yeah, cool. Understood.
So is there a read latency effect when logs have a lot of structured metadata?
I would say not. Probably in the case where you have like pretty much like everything in structured metadata and you're really close to hitting like this limit, you may see some performance hit, but there is no example that comes to my mind right away. So I'm just speculating that there might be some issue around that.
What
But I'm
about
sure it would be way worse, like doing like a parse after that.
What about on ingestion? Is there a noticeable difference between no structured metadata and lots of structured metadata?
I wouldn't say so, because at the end of the day, all the attachment of structured metadata happens more on the client side, right? But for OTLP, but that's like a different thing. So all of that logic actually happens on the client side. So once that reaches Loki, it's very much like making sure that you put the things where they need to be. But there is not much difference, I would say. Now on the OTLP, it has like these extra steps of, okay, I have the OTLP payload, I unpack it, and now I map things to index labels, structured metadata, I drop things, and so on.
So we're in there. I'm being an active timekeeper here because I'm really excited about the last question, and I want to drop it. It's a really good question from the champions. Salva, you can't call the safe word of pizza on this one. You can just say you can use the overarching term "we're thinking about this" because I think it's a really good question. Loki 4.0, we had a call with Ed, and we obviously talked a lot about the architectural changes, new storage format, new way of ingesting, and so forth. The question from Mike Zimmerman is, they like how structured data is now, but with the new redesigns of the architecture, what's that going to basically look like? Are we going to continue moving structured data forwards? How's that going to potentially look in the new land of Loki 4.0?
Yeah. So
also, sorry, my bad. I mistyped. It's not Zimmerman. It's Timmerman.
I'll maintain it.
It's my bad.
I mean, I was actually going to make the joke of like, it's not our new maintainer, it's another champion. We've just got it is our maintainer and champion. Sorry, Mike.
Yeah, so I don't know how much I can answer that question, not because I don't want to, but because maybe I lack like some context on that, right? So, but from the customer perspective, we still need to solve the issue of being able to attach things for log lines, right? Like trace IDs, or solving like this OTel use case where the log line can actually be small and everything comes in metadata. So we still need to store that metadata somewhere. Will that be in the same way that we store structured metadata today? I don't think so. It's probably we end up using like some columnar storage, where each structured metadata field or the equivalent will have its own column, so we can query faster or process less data. But my point is that the problems for which we build structured metadata still apply. So we need to implement something that satisfies those requirements. So it will be more on the internal side of things, on how we store things, how we query things. Like, I don't think any of the query semantics will change that much, but we will probably be able to process them faster, or maybe having like better discoverability about the structured metadata fields that exist, like even provide some auto completion. I don't know, like there is a huge world out there to explore once we go down the road.
Yeah, I think it'll slightly change the, like, where on the spectrum we fall, like at what point is it better to make it a label and what point is it better to make it a structured metadata. But like, I can't imagine us saying like, no, now after Loki 4.0 and all of these architectural changes, you can absolutely include dynamic IDs as labels. That's never going to happen. It's still going to be like best practices not to do that. So it's going to change it a little bit, I think, but like I don't think it's going to change it that much. I think structured metadata is still, it's not going to be obsolete. It's still going to be better for higher cardinality, like dynamic sort of IDs than labels will be, because even though we're making these changes to make querying labels faster, it's not going to be no cost, or there's still going to be a performance hit, right? So you still should not include higher cardinality things as labels.
Yeah, I think that's in general like the right take here. We don't know, but we will do our best to to make sure we can answer like those queries like in a faster way or not. I can maybe like dive a little bit on how structured metadata is implemented on the low level. So we in Loki store like everything in chunks, right? Like a given stream has like a set of chunks that we cut every so often and we put on object store. And each of those chunks is just a collection of logs. And we happen to put the structured metadata along the log line. So if you have and one within next to each other. So if you want to filter on a very specific structured metadata field, you still need to go through each one of the log lines items and go to the structured metadata section and look for the structured metadata field that you are looking for. Whereas if we happen to be on a more columnar kind of way of doing things, we could jump right away into the relevant field that you are looking for, discard everything that doesn't contain that structured metadata, and then filter out on the ones that we care about. And once we resolve like the rows that we care about, then we extract the rest.
Because it's like a similar vibe to how Tempo has their columnar storage. It's like they have extra like attribute columns, which you can like add on to. And so if we basically, this is all sort of us spitballing here, as in like there's obviously an implementation going on behind the scenes. But like if we did have them all separated out into columns, as you say, it's like you just specifically query for that potential structure metadata key column, and you only pull those specific value chunks out, and you know those are the ones specifically that you need to then run the rest of your query for. So we potentially do gain performance gains compared to, as you say, it's like at the moment we're like row orientated and you have to incrementally go through and look for all of these things.
Yeah, exactly. That actually opens a door to maybe discuss, even though I don't know if we have enough time, about a feature that we implemented not so long ago that we're like using Bloom filters to kind of try to speed up the queries that we're using structured metadata. That was a really interesting experiment that we ran and proved to be somewhat successful, but only for very big tenants that had like a lot of data to iterate through. So it really paid off the extra cost of having to store all these blooms and query them to discard a lot of data. What happened is that for tiny customers, we were writing like too many things. So actually processing the blooms were taking longer than maybe just like querying things right away. So yeah, that we got like many learnings from that we expect to add to the new architecture that we are working on.
So Bloom filters are still expected to be around for structured metadata, right? And even in the new changes?
Yeah, absolutely. It's just that we won't use them in the same way that we were using them today. Like we may store more things in blooms or different things in blooms and arrange those blooms like on different places and even making them a first class citizen in the future. So you don't need to download way more things before deciding whether you need to look for some stuff or not. We haven't gone there yet, so
Yeah.
time will come. Yeah.
So I feel like the rule of thumb with Bloomfields, because we always get asked it in the community, is like if you're extremely proficient with Loki and you know your way around and you have an extremely large bit of data set. It's an experimental feature. Use it at your own risk, and you know we do have customers that do get the performance benefits if they're large enough. But for the everyday user of Loki, it's kind of one of those things that maybe sort of wait till Loki 4.0 and hopefully there'll be like better support and use that as that feature rolls into more of like a production side rather than experimental. Because
Absolutely. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Salva, for coming on and answering our questions. It's been the full hour, and it's been so great to ask you all the things. Jay,
Yeah, absolutely.
satisfied?
I really enjoy that. So thanks for hosting me. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Salva. I really enjoyed blitzing through that entire configuration folder with you. I'm just there like writing notes and I'll be like, add note here from Salva and da, 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 da. So all great. Thank you very much.
Anytime.
Yeah. Awesome. And if anyone watching this has any ideas on what we didn't cover or like just ideas for future topics for Loki community calls, this is for you. So give us a shout in the comments of what you want to see next, and we'll make it happen. And you know, if we can convince Salva to come back, then we will, of course. Thank you everyone for watching, and we will see you next month. Bye.